It is the year of the tiger, and you're listening to Queer Lives with me, Hina Siddiqui, where I have conversations with queer people from across the world because I want to. Please do note this podcast deals with mature subjects and explicit language will be used. Audience discretion is advised. Today, we are in conversation with Mary Ann Adams, who is joining us from Georgia in the United States. Mary Ann is the founder and executive director of ZAMI NOBLA, National Organization of Black Lesbians in Aging. She works with several Black and LGBTQIA plus organizations in the US with a focus on community partnerships and public health. Welcome, Mary Ann. The woman has spoken. Hello, hi, welcome, Mary Ann. How are you?
I am doing very well. How are you?
I am okay. I'm okay. I've just had to shift houses, so I'm just still kind of settling down. How are things in Georgia?
Actually, today it's a beautiful, beautiful winter day. It's about 61 degrees. Uh, Daffodils are blooming in my yard.
Wow.
Yes. There's some greenery sprouting here and there. My dog is enjoying her walk daily. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
God bless us and God bless beautiful days. I love days that you just kind of get up and see the beauty around you. I mean,
Yes.
which is more about you than the day itself, but sure.
Yes, we won't talk about the politics of Georgia currently, but today is a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
I'm so thankful that you're doing this little conversation with me on this beautiful day. So let's jump
Yes.
right into it. I usually start with like this question, which goes, "What is your story?" And you can answer that in any way you think you want to. So, Mary Ann, what is your story?
How much time do we have?
As much as we need. We can come back for a part two if we need to.
My story is one of survival and resilience. I come from a long line of Black folk who worked from sun up to sundown, who instilled in all of us this humongous work ethic. We understood very early on, very acutely, that we were all that we had, and that we had to, as a family, as a community, band together, and we had to survive. And the only way we were going to survive was to do it as a community, as a family. I was born in Mississippi, and I mean Mississippi, with this ugly racial history, with this history of white supremacy, and racial segregation, has certainly made me into the woman that I am. There's no doubt about that. The good, the bad, and the ugly. My story is one of childhood poverty, childhood sexual abuse, childhood marginalized housing, and certainly substandard education. I was born in 1954, and this was around the time that the country was shifting a bit in terms of racial relations. Certainly that was the year that the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education, declaring that schools in this country, in the South particularly, be desegregated. And this was when I was born, and I did not attend a desegregated high school until I was 16. So that's how long in my state, in my town, it took to see this decree be put into action. My mother was 2 weeks short of 18 when she gave birth to me. I was her second child, her oldest daughter, and soon there would be 8 siblings after me. So I would say by the time my mother was 40, she had 10 children. And she was really ill-equipped to take care of those children financially, emotionally, spiritually. She was just really ill-equipped to do that. So I was a child who was very introverted, very shy, a bookworm who really spent a lot of time looking at my internal, internal interior sides, if you will. And I was actually rewarded in my community for being smart, for being a good reader. My grandmother, when I was about 6 or 7, would take me around to her friends' houses, and they would bring these big dusty books down for me to read. And they would open up these books and say, my grandmother says she's the best reader. She can read. And they would say, child, read. And they would give me these big books. And I didn't know what were in these books, but I soon realized as the years went on that they didn't either, because many of them were never afforded the privilege of learning to read. They were forbidden legally to learn to read as Black folk in this country. And so they were so proud that in their lifetime that they were able to see Black children being taught to read and who could do it well. So there was a sense of community pride when we achieved and when we achieved well. And so I learned that early on, that my accomplishments and my achievements were not just mine personally, but they belonged to my community, to my race, and that I was able to pick up a mantle and I was able to do things that they never, ever had an opportunity to do. So that was really instilled in me early on. So I survived in spite of and because of, and knew early on that I did not want to live in Mississippi the rest of my life. I really wanted to live in California or New York City. I would read these books and fantasize and see myself in the village, or see myself, down on Castro with all the cool queer people. But, unfortunately, that was not gonna be my story. My story was to remain in the South because there's so much work to do. And so when I was 12 years old, there was an influx of civil rights leaders into my community. I grew up in Oxford, and Oxford is infamous for University of Mississippi, known as Ole Miss, a school that rioted in 1962 to keep the first Black man, James Meredith, from coming to school there, and people were killed. It was national news. So this is a backdrop to my life. And when I was 12, so all these civil rights leaders came into my town. There was an influx of activists and organizers and social workers and lawyers. And they started Central Mississippi Legal Services to provide legal services for Black and brown and poor people. And they also started the Black House. And the Black House was right next to my school. And the Black House was a hub of activity for the kids. We would go there and we would learn after school, we would learn Black history, we would learn Black literature, we would learn Black political science. We would put out a community newsletter that we did ourselves. We would distribute the newsletters called the Soul Force. We wrote all the articles. We were taught to do that. We were able to engage with students from the University of Mississippi who would come to tutor us after school. And actually, I met the first person I'd ever seen from India. He came to tutor us. And I remember he was so cute. We were like 10, 11, 12. We all had a crush on him. But so I was able to see just a diversity of people, really, for the first time in my life. Because I grew up in a community called Freemanstown. and after the Civil War, Black folks who lived in the countryside actually migrated into the town of Oxford, and they developed this community called Freemanstown. It was really the first free Black folks, and it was a very insular community. It was a very segregated community, of course, but we were able to have the teachers and the ministers and the shopkeepers and the barbershop proprietors. And so we were all living with each other. There was no segregation in terms of class because they had no place to go. There was no housing that they could leave. And so in a way that was very beneficial for us because we were able to really interact and learn and teach and be in the presence of all of this Black brilliance right next door to each other. I mean, the preacher lived right next door to the teacher, to the janitor, to the cook, to the maid. I mean, everybody lived together. Everybody certainly looked out for each other. And so we we were essentially a self-made Black, even community. We were about 25% of the community of the population in Oxford.
Okay. Wow.
So we were a small population to begin with. And I was telling a friend of mine recently who lives in California, I said, we were talking about our hometown. And she said, well, there were so many Black people in Oxford. Oxford is a primarily Black town. And I was like, no, it's not. It never has been. She said, but when we were growing up, I said, because all we saw were Black people. All we knew were Black people. For us, it was 100% Black. But in terms of demographics, it never has been. And she was like, I am shocked to hear that. So that was our world. And at the Black House, it was a very heady time to be a kid. We're talking about the late 60s. We're talking about the Vietnam War. We're talking about the beginning of the women's movement, the feminist movement, the civil rights movement. I mean, students at Jackson State and Kent State are protesting and getting shot down by the police. And, you have the death of Dr. King and the President John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General. I mean, there was just so much going on during that time when I was growing up. And to be able to go to the Black House and have some kind of context for what was going on, and to be given an opportunity to listen and to learn and to do. It was also the headquarters for the NAACP, and as kids, we were allowed to sit and listen to the strategies that were going on, to how they planned to organize the community. There was a lot of student activity. Black students at Ole Miss were trying to start a Black student union, and they would come to the Black House because Rev Wayne Johnson was the organizer and founder of the Black House and was well respected in the community. And so they would come and they would get counsel and they would strategize from him. And so we were in the midst, I was in the midst of all of this stuff. And it's really how I learned to organize. We also started a cooperative movement. We had a credit union and a daycare center. And we were, allowed to work at the credit and the store. We had a community store. So this was really the backdrop to my life, Hannah, and really how I grew up.
Wow. All of this, it sounds so ideal when I hear it, but obviously in retrospect, of course, it looks all rosy, but of course, like you described, there was a lot of unrest in the country at that time in the US. I want to understand what did the elders not the elders, or at least the parents in the community respond to something like the Black House? Because you'd assume that the kids want to go and do something that makes them feel like they have purpose, but the parents would be like, no, keep your nose to the ground. So how did that work out?
That's a great question. And I grew up in a family that, as I mentioned earlier, it certainly was not a family that had economic privilege. We didn't have class privilege. We were very, very poor. Oftentimes, my mother was a single parent. and she had to drop out of high school in 10th grade to take care of her sick grandmother. So she had very limited education, and she worked as a cook and a maid and as someone who ironed clothes for the white people in the community. My mother also had a disability, and it was very debilitating, not just for her, but for the family. And her disability was narcolepsy. And we had no understanding of narcolepsy at the time. And it was called a sleeping sickness. So my mother would be talking with you and she would just fall asleep. And as a child, you don't understand this. You just see that your mother is absent. She's not available because she's asleep. And you don't know what's going on. And my aunt, who was her, also had the same disability, and she would fall asleep just talking to you as well. And so there were gaps in our income because my mother was really not able to hold a full-time job. There was really no public assistance in the way that there's public assistance now. There was something that was called commodities, where poor people were given government cheese and meat and rice primarily. And so because of the poverty that we grew up in, my mother and her mother and my great grandparents were certainly taught that you needed to go along to get along, in order to achieve. And they saw white people lynching and killing Black people who got out of line, who dared to talk back, who dared to be resistant in their community. They didn't want that same plight for their children. So they essentially taught us to be integrationists, to study hard, to because they felt like education was going to be the key for us in terms of upward mobility. It certainly was not going to be a trust fund. And so it was going to be education. And so, my mother and my grandmother did not necessarily approve of the militancy that was happening at the time. They did not necessarily approve of these outsiders, if you will, coming in and doing what they called brainwashing the children. But many of the respectability Black folk in the community felt the same way. But despite that, they did not prevent us from going to the Black House. They grumbled and they talked under their breath, but they never, because they understood on the one hand, outwardly, why they did not support it. I think there was a side of them that really appreciated having these educated Black folk be role models for us, having these Black folk who were lawyers and doctors, because that's what they wanted us to be. So they were kind of ambivalent about it, but they really, why they didn't really, they were not cheerleaders. They also did not preclude us from going.
It's interesting because as the history that I've studied doesn't include nuance like this. Like these are just facts mentioned in any history textbook, that at least because in India we barely study American history, and which I'm sure is also true at your end. But this idea that there was an intelligentsia almost, that the people leading movements, the civil rights movements, were educated people, were people who were the role models. And it's interesting to hear about how the generation reacted to them. So thank you for sharing this.
Oh, absolutely. Totally. I mean, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that there were other towns in Mississippi, and you certainly had Black folks who lived in the Delta, who certainly were not formally educated, who led these movements. It just so happened. And also in Oxford, while you had someone like Reverend Wayne Johnson, who was well educated, who had gone away, and who had learned about cooperative economics and who had learned about the cooperative movement and was able to bring those skills back home, that you also had the people in the community who were not so formally educated, who were able to support this movement with the few dollars that they had. Folks were able to cook food because you needed subsistence, who were able to feed us, and also who did not preclude us from joining into that movement because they were growing these leaders and these young movement leaders. And so I think that their role was also equally as important. But you're right, you don't often hear much how folks other than Dr. King and those folks, but the movement would not have been anything without those soldiers on the ground, without those poor Black folk who were going to work for, the man during the day, cooking their food and ironing their clothes and taking care of their children. But at night, they were in these Black churches helping to strategize and plot and plan our liberation.
Wow, I'm literally getting goosebumps. So, so this thus far has brought us to your story till age 10. So let's get into the next decade. What happened in your teens?
So I was writing plays. I mentioned to you that I was a bookworm. I was also, I was taking these achievement tests and I skipped a grade. And so I was with these kids who were older. I graduated high school at 16. I could not wait to leave home. And I wanted to go to a historically Black college, Tougaloo College, and major in journalism. But the folks at the Black House told me that I needed to attend the University of Mississippi, that the more Black students who went there, the better it would be for generations coming after us. And I told this story to some students at Spelman College. And I don't know if you're familiar with Spelman College, but it's a Black women's college here in Atlanta. It's well known and well respected as one of the top colleges in the country. And I was telling this to some Black queer students there, and they were saying, they were just aghast. They said there's no way that they would allow anybody to tell them where to go to college. They just couldn't believe that I did that I would give up my dream of going to Tougaloo to major in journalism, and that I would go to the University of Mississippi because my community told me. But that was not anything I questioned. You have to look at, I was rooted in Black community. I was rooted in organizing. I was sitting at the feet of these civil rights icons to me. And I was in the room when the Black students from Ole Miss were coming to the Black House talking about strife and talking about oppression and discrimination. So this was, for me, something that was really integrated into my whole being. And so when they told me that this is what I needed to do, I did not question that. It's what I did. But I was smart enough to understand that I could not go to that predominantly white supremacist school and major in journalism and write the kind of stories that I wanted to write. So there was only one Black professor at the college when I went. And I saw her, and she was a social work professor. And so I said, oh, I know what I'll major in. I'll major in sociology and social work so that I can have some close proximity to Dr. Jeanette Jennings. And that's what I did. And throughout my college years, there were 200 Black students there, and there were 12,000 white students.
Wow.
And it was not an easy time. Most of these white students were the sons and daughters of plantation owners. They had privilege and wealth, and the wealth that they had came from these cotton plantations. And I actually saw my folks pick cotton and hoe cotton. I actually picked cotton when I was a kid. I actually went out in the white folks' cotton fields and tried to pick cotton, but I didn't do too well. I picked, you're supposed to pick like 125 pounds. I picked like 25 pounds. And, I was deliberately slouching off, because that was not the life I saw for myself. I mean, I didn't have any money, I didn't have anything, but I was like, no, I can't be picking cotton for a living. So I was not very good at picking cotton. And because I was not very good at it, my folks did not attempt to try to send me back out to the cotton fields. But I absolutely have seen, I think it's important for your listeners to also understand that I remember seeing and having to go to the clinic and sit in a waiting room that said colored only. I had to drink from a water fountain that said white only and colored only. When I was in the 9th grade, when we would go to the movie theater, Black people could not sit with white people. We had to sit up in the balcony, and we had to go into the movie theater from the back up the steps. And that's how we entered. And and the white folks were sitting below us, and we would throw popcorn at them and all kinds of things. So this was not so long ago. A lot of people think, oh, segregation was, no. No, I'm 67 years old, and I've seen all of this. When I would open my school book, Hannah, it would have white marked out and color written in. And I remember saying to the teacher, why is white marked out and color written in? Why are we getting these books? We would get the hand-me-down books from the white schools. When they got new books, they would send all their used books over to our school. We never had any new school books. So that's how I grew up. And I saw, jobs were very limited. So the teachers who had gone away and gotten their education to be school teachers, they taught in the Black schools. That was their life.
I'm just going to take a moment to absorb this.
Sure.
Because again, this is similar things were done in India, and we've studied about it in history books, but we've studied about it in history books.
Yes.
I have never come across someone who's actually lived this. And when my grandparents were around and they did live this reality, my grandmother, I don't think I was smart enough or old enough to question her about it. But such is life.
Sure. Well, I lived it. I went to the University of Mississippi because there were only 200 Black students. Most of us at the time were academically top of our class, the top students. And most of us were first generation college students. And our parents and grandparents who sent us away to college were still working as maids and cooks and janitors, and they didn't have much money to give us. We had student aid at the time. That was sort of when we were able to start getting federal student aid to go to college. And as a matter of fact, my grandfather worked as a janitor on the campus at Ole Miss, and I would see him on campus from time to time. Many of us, our parents worked in the cafeteria. We were first generation college students, and we would go through the cafeteria line, and they would actually serve us. That kind of dichotomy, it certainly exists for many of us. And because many of us were poor, we would help each other out. We would share food, we would share clothes, we would share resources, whatever resources that we had, we certainly shared it. At the same time, we were achieving and we were agitated. We were agitating for better resources for the Black Student Union. We were agitating for more Black professors on campus. We were agitating for Black studies. So we were in this predominantly white environment that was racist, that was white supremacist, that had Confederate flags all the time, but we were still raising hell, and we were still making demands, and we were still agitating. We had the first Black football player to come while we were there, the first Black basketball player. We were able to demand from the student government that we have funding specifically to bring in Black speakers. And so we did that. So we were not there just a scared little Black kid. No, that was not our, no. We were pretty fierce, absolutely. But as a result of going to the University of Mississippi, my peers who attended college there don't feel as though that's someplace that we're proud of. And so you see a lot of students having these, my alma mater is blah, blah, blah. No, we don't do that. We very seldom go back. I've actually been invited to come back the end of April to serve as a grand marshal in the Pride Parade. And they now have an LGBTQ population that's fairly large. They have a women and gender center. And they're the ones that have invited me to come to be the grand marshal in the Pride Parade. So the more things change, the more they remain the same.
You mentioned queer a few times while talking about these early years, and I'm wondering how did that feature onto this landscape?
So I had no conception of being queer, being a lesbian when I was growing up. There was I don't remember seeing much representation. There was a guy named Fisher who was a hairdresser, who was a Black gay man in the neighborhood, and our parents would send us over to his house so he could babysit us. Everybody knew he was gay. At the time they called gay people sissies. That was the derogatory term, but that's what people did. And I don't ever remember any malice, or there was never any kind of negative talk about him. I mean, he was a hairdresser, he was gay, he was the one who kept the kids, just that kind of thing. And then I never heard my mother say anything derogatory at all. And my mother actually was my mother was considered to be a very sweet woman by everybody in the community. She was not the type of woman who would really talk about people in a derogatory way. She actually gave us a lot of freedom. I mean, a lot of freedom. And so I didn't hear anything about my mother in a negative about anything. She was just not the type to talk about people in a bad way. And so when I went to the university, and there were some gay guys, Black gay guys in high school. Everybody knew they were gay, but again, it was just nothing said about it. It was just no conversation about it. So when I got to University of Mississippi, there were some Black gay guys. I didn't know any lesbians there at all, none. It was just never talked about. It was just not a thing. Gay liberation was happening around the country, but not in the context of where I was. It was not part of my life. When I was 19 and graduated from the University of Mississippi, I went to live on an Army base for a year while I figured out what to do, because my uncle and my favorite aunt, they were in the military. My uncle was in the military, so I went to live with them, and I worked in the post nursery. And that's really when I started doing a lot of self-reflection. It was actually the first time, Hannah, in a long time that I had a chance to just stop, really. Because I just been, when I was in school, I had internships because I was a sociologist, social work major. I was very active. I was an activist. I was doing all this stuff, and I never had an opportunity to just stop from the time I was 12. And on this Army base, I had nothing to do but to stop. I would go to work during 9 to 5, and then I would really I sat with myself, and I had always been in relationships with men, but I never had any kind of emotional connection to them. And I started to question why that was. I was dating guys on the Army base, but I was never really connected emotionally to them. And then I started to come to grips with the fact that I was a lesbian. And I met this woman at the post nursery. Her name was Mildred. And she was working there. Her husband was in the military. She's a Black woman. She was from New York. And I told her that I thought I might be a lesbian. And she told me she was bisexual. And she told me these stories about being with these women. And it was just like, wow. And she really offered to be the first one to turn me out. But as curious as I was, as titillated as I was by the prospect of that, I also was a romantic, and I declined that invitation because I wanted my first time to be really special. I wanted to be with somebody I loved. I wanted to have butterflies and all of that. So I said no. And I often wonder if I had said yes, how that would have changed the trajectory of my life.
At the age of 19.
With a 40-year-old married woman who had children. I mean, she had a husband and she had children.
God bless her.
I mean, if I had allowed her to turn me out, I probably would have been knocking on her door at all hours of the day and night, saying, I love you, please let me in.
I don't know how safe that would have been on a military base, but okay.
Exactly. Exactly. I hated living on that military base. I hated it. Oh, it was just so restrictive, and it was prohibited. It was just horrible. But yeah.
So by this time you had completed your degree in social work and sociology. And
yes.
Where did you take that then, other than the military base?
Well, I was trying to figure things out. My focus was in gerontology throughout school, every paper that I wrote, because my best friend from 9 years old was an older Black woman named Miss Savannah. And Miss Savannah just really poured into me. And I spent my summers with her, and she would regale me with the stories of the community and Black history. And, Miss Savannah was considered to be really mean by all the other kids in the neighborhood. And if you walked across her grass, she would bring her gun out and threaten to shoot you. And, Halloween, she would bring out scalding. When we went over to trick or treat one Halloween, and she would come out with this hot, I said, Miss Savannah, it's me. And she loved me for some reason. She taught me how to bake biscuits, and and I just spent so much time with her. I mean, I loved her and she loved me, and she was middle class. She owned property. Her children had gone to college and they were now teachers. And that was a great example for me to see. When I went away to university, I would come and see her, and I saw her becoming increasingly alone and lonely and isolated. And that left an indelible imprint on me. And so every paper I wrote was about elders. Every project, that was just my jam. That was just my thing. I was trying to understand this. And so I was trying to figure out when I graduated what I was going to do. I didn't have the means to go to grad school. A break. So I stayed on the Army base, and then I came back home to Oxford, and because I was trying to figure out, well, I had a couple of friends and they said, well, let's go to California. One was a Black gay man, and one, she was progressive. And we grew up together, but they ended up going to San Francisco. I did not. I went to the Army base. They went to California. The reason why I didn't go to California with them is because I knew that they were more adventuresome. They would do whatever they needed to do to survive. I could not. I was not made out of that kind of stock. And they ended up going out there. They had no money, no resources, and they did whatever they needed to do to survive. I knew I wasn't built like that. So I came back to Oxford and I worked at a regional center for developmentally disabled children and adults. And then I started working, I did a 360. I started working in the cooperative movement where I went back to the Black House. I started working at the cooperative. There was the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives, and they had state chapters. There was the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and they had state chapters around the South. They had daycare centers, they had feeder pig cooperatives, they had credit unions, they had quilting co-ops, they had, you name it. So what they were doing essentially is that they were instilling in Black folk that we could certainly be self-sufficient, that we could be entrepreneurs, that we could start our own enterprises and we could run them and we could operate them and we could be self-sufficient financially. And so I moved to Jackson, Mississippi. I started working with Melba McAfee, who was the director of the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives. And we were essentially a 3-person operation. We would go to all of these rural co-ops around the South. And I love that. I mean, we had a watermelon cooperative and we would teach them, we would teach them bookkeeping skills. We would teach them how to organize and develop their board of directors, you know, how to write bylaws. So all the administrative and managerial skills that they needed to be able to be efficient, effective, and self-sufficient, we taught them how to do that. I love those. I mean, I absolutely loved that job. And the reason why I loved that job so much was because, one, I learned so much from Melba. I mean, everything I know about organizing, I learned it from her when I became an adult. Everything I learned about efficient management, I learned it from her. What I learned about humility, I learned it from those rural Black folk who many of them had a 3rd grade education and they were running their own businesses. They were open to learning and expanding the landscape beneath their feet. What I learned about generosity, I learned from those rural Black folk. What I learned about grace, I learned from those rural Black folk. I absolutely loved that job. I loved being able to take what they had poured into me, my community. That's what I mean by the they. And I mean my community from the time I was born, my community to the Black House, the professor at Ole Miss, to my relatives on the Army base, to coming back to the co-op. I was able to take what all those Black folks poured into me, and I was able to do my part, because it was a small part, in taking the skills I had learned and helping to teach those skills to those Black folk who were not formally educated, but who was trying to develop a legacy, who were trying to generate wealth to leave to their children and their children's children and their children's children, so they would no longer have to pick cotton in somebody's cotton field, making somebody else rich.
That sounds like an experience. I envy that experience almost. Just to kind of go back into the nitty-gritty of things for a little bit, this co-op movement that you are talking about, could you tell me a little bit more about it and how it was funded, who started it, stuff like that?
Yes. So the cooperative movement is, it's not a new movement. You know, in the context of social work, I learned about it. There was a white woman named Jane Addams who lived in Chicago and who worked with children who were abandoned by their parents who were unable to care for them, poor children. And she started this movement to help these kids. And you can sort of look at foster care as a cooperative movement, if you will, because you had these households who agreed to take in these children and who all converged together to take care of them. So that's really the concept of a cooperative movement. Everybody is joining together. So for example, with the credit union, you buy shares in the credit union. That's how the credit union was started in Oxford. You know, so everybody, if a share was $25, you know, and you got paid $25 a week, because that's what my mother made, $25 a week. You could put $1 in until you were able to have your $25. And so everybody would put their share in toward building this so that everybody's on equal footing. You know, you don't have more than me. You know, we're all parallel in terms of ownership of this particular store. And when we got enough money, we were able to buy produce and we were able to buy products to go into the store. And so the cooperative movements are the cotton gin, for example, is not just owned by one person, but it's owned by a collaboration of people who all have equal equity into this particular co-op. One co-op, for example, was and I think this is a good example, and I'm not really explaining this very well, but this is a good example of why it was so important and necessary for these people to have their own cooperative. There's a place called Mileston, Mississippi, and there were these Black farmers who were not formally educated, who were ginning cotton. Because, you know, when you pick the cotton, you have to gin the cotton before you sell the cotton. And so they were taking the cotton that they had picked to the cotton gin, because they did not own their own cotton gin. It was owned by the white man in the town. And he would often cheat them and not give them the amount that their cotton was worth. So the cotton was worth, say, $1 a pound. I mean, let's say it was worth $1 a pound. He would give them 10 cents a pound. And so they could never get ahead. They continue to do more work, but they could never get ahead. So they came to us because they wanted to establish their own cotton gin. And they to learn. They wanted a cooperative. They wanted a cotton gin cooperative that all the Black farmers in that town owned a piece of, because they couldn't do it by themselves. And so we were able to come in and help them establish this cotton gin. And so they actually bought equipment. They learned how to do the books. They learned how to develop the board of directors. And in turn, they became the primary cotton gin for all the other Black farmers who were in these other towns. You see? So they were able to create this cooperative movement, become self-sufficient. And this was definitely empowerment. It was affirming. And they didn't have to go to the white man anymore who was cheating them at their hard-earned labor. And so that's why, and so and the great thing I like about the cooperative movement is it's not just one thing. You know, the concept is the same, but it can extend to a daycare center, which is, we also had daycares, the Watermelon Cooperative. You know, all the Black farmers in that area in Hattiesburg, Mississippi would band together, and by doing it collectively, they could buy more land. And they could own more land, they could grow more watermelons, and they would bring their watermelons north and to Chicago, for example, because they had a lot of relatives who had migrated to Chicago, and they would sell them during the summers. And then they would come back home to Mississippi, and they would have money to send their children to school, you know, to buy more property. I mean, it's just the cooperative movement is something I think that we really need to take a better look at. You know, now we call them nonprofits. You know what I mean? But I think the cooperative movement is something that I think would help us become more self-sufficient, would give us a lot of communal pride, that would allow us to feel empowered, and that would really help generate wealth for generations coming after us.
I think we've reached your third decade now. And we're coming close to where I think there was a time when you moved to Georgia after this. So how did that happen? And
my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when she was in her late 30s.
Mm.
And at the same time, I had a sister who was 9 years old, who was diagnosed with a really it was an unusual form of rheumatic heart fever called sitting Ham's chorea. Sitting Ham's chorea. And so while my mother was in the hospital with cancer, my sister was in the hospital in Memphis with this. And at this time, my mother was in the hospital for a year and she passed away. And she left 7 younger kids who were from 4 years old to 16. And there was me and my brother and my sister. So I ended up becoming legal guardian of the 4 oldest kids. And I was living in Jackson. Jackson is about 2 hours from my hometown. And my sister ended up taking the 3 younger kids. And then she already had a kid, so we figured, it would be easier for her to rear her children with the younger kids. But she ended up not being able to do that because I'm like 25 and she was 22, and my brother was 27, but he had a family, so he opted not to take anyone. And my grandmother said that she couldn't do it, and my relatives told me that I should put my siblings in foster care. It was not my responsibility, and I could not do that. And so while we were very poor, didn't have resources, I moved my siblings to Jackson with me. And I was working at this time for legal services as a paralegal. And I took on a job as the editor of the newsletter there and also as the book librarian. So I had like 3 jobs at the same agency, so I could get more money to take care of them because my folks didn't have any money. And so I took my brothers and sisters. They were 16, they were 9, 11, 13, and 16. My brother, who was 16, decided after a month he wanted to go back to Oxford. So he went back. And so I had my 2 sisters and my brother. My brother was in the middle. He was 11, 9, 11, and 13. And I became their legal guardian. And it was the 4 of us against the world, And I had really sort of fancied myself a nomad. I was going to go to Jackson, then I was going to move to California. At this point, I felt ready. I was going to go to New York. But once I became their legal guardian, I understood that I could not travel here and there with those kids and wouldn't be fair to them. I needed a stable environment for them. I was also in grad school at the time in social work, and I dropped out to take care of them. And so I did that until the youngest one graduated high school, and I drove her to college, and I drove to Atlanta. That was September 25th, 1988. It was on my birthday. I would never forget it. And that's how I ended up in Georgia. I never saw myself in Atlanta. I actually came here because I was involved with a woman who was in grad school here. And so that's how I ended up in Atlanta.
Wow. Can we talk a little bit more about the experience of raising 3, 4 young people while being a young person yourself and continuing? And you said you had 3 jobs. You mentioned a relationship. How was this all? How was it all happening?
There's not been any time in my life where I was able to do anything without the help of my community. It just has never, ever. We do nothing by ourselves, and I'm certainly no exception. There was a group of Black nationalists, women and men, who essentially took an interest in my story, in me and my family, and they essentially surrounded us with a lot of care and love and concern. These folks were all real estate agents by day, and they agitated by night. Don't ask me why that was their MO, but it was. They also, and they all had these big old raggedy houses. And so they did a lot of family things. We joined in with them. Their children became my brothers and sisters' friends. The teachers at the school where they attended looked out for us. They knew our story. They helped us as well. My mother's brother moved into Jackson down the street. He would help me after school, stay there until I could pick them up. I mean, I just really, it was really community. We didn't have a lot of money. I was really happy that they were pretty much all the same size, so I could go to the Gap and, you know, buy 2 pair of jeans, get one free. You know, that was sort of what we did. And we also bought a house during this time. Now, I never fancied myself having a house at 26, but my real estate Black nationalist friends were determined that we were going to have a house. And so we bought a brand new house in this place called Presidential Hills. And it was a subdivision. Every street was named after the president of the United States. So we lived on Abraham Lincoln Drive. So there was John Kennedy, there was Lyndon B. Johnson. So all these Black folks are living in this subdivision with every street named after a white president of the United States. It was called Presidential Hills. That was the name of the subdivision.
Does this neighborhood still exist?
It does.
Do you have pictures from your time there? Could you share them, please?
I know I would have to look deep and hard, but it does exist. So we lived on Abraham Lincoln Drive. And again, the community, you know, looked out for us. I mean, we all looked out for each other's kids and all of that. And my brothers and sisters, you know, I really reared them the way I wish I had been reared. I was very respectful. I didn't go into their rooms and snoop in their belongings. I would knock on the door. But I also raised them to be feminists. I raised my brother to be a feminist. You know, as the only male in the household, his friends would come over and he would be washing dishes and they would be like, man, why are you washing dishes? You got all these women in the house. And he would, you know, I eat, I'm a part of this household, chill out. So he had no shame around it. I mean, I taught him how to, and even now, after my brother was married, his wife called me and she said, Marianne, I need to talk to you about Dennis. And I was like, oh God, what does she want to talk about? What has he done? And I said, okay, what's going on? And she said, I just want to thank you. I said, thank me for what? She said, I want to thank you for the way that you raised your brother. And I said, wow, because I had not heard that before. She said, I want to thank you for the way you raised your brother because he's my husband. And she said, he is so great at cleaning and cooking and helping me take care of they had 2 kids. And I said, you know, I knew that he could. I didn't know if he would, but I certainly know that he could because I taught them to be self-sufficient, to be independent, take care of themselves. I mean, I really raised them with this whole mantra, it was us against the world. You know, that I was their sister, I was not their mother. And it really, and they had to love each other and take care of each other. And that's really how I reared them. I was really lucky that when everybody turned 16, they had to get a summer job. They had to open up a bank account. I would pay the bills and we would all sit at the table together. And I would teach them, these are the bills that we have. This is how much money we have. This is what we're doing with this. This is any extra money that we have. Everybody had to open up a checking account when they got a job at 16 during the summer, because it was important that I teach them those financial literacy skills that nobody taught me, that I had to learn the hard way. And I didn't want that to happen to them because I knew they didn't have a mother, they didn't have a father. And so I really wanted to instill those skills in them. And they understood that you know, we don't have wealth. We don't have trust funds. We're going to have to work hard. We're going to have to educate ourselves in order for us to generate what we need as we go forward in our lives and what we need to leave our kids. And so nobody, and I was really lucky, I didn't have the issues with a lot of teenage rebellion. Nobody got pregnant, nobody went to jail, nobody was on drugs. My brother was a drum major, my sister was in the band. And they were really pretty good kids. They really did well. They all three, two of them still live there in Jackson. My brother's daughter, I just posted on Facebook.
Okay, I think my internet connection has gotten a little messed up. Recording. Right, so we were at two of them live in Jackson. Oh no.
Can you?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't hear your question.
We were at two of your siblings live in Jackson.
Yes. So they live in Jackson and they have children. And my younger sister, her daughter is in grad school. She's graduating in May. She's going to be a psychologist. So I've been helping her financially. And really just trying to make sure that she stays in school because she's been having some hard times. Her father passed. So I've been making sure, my friends have also been helping her financially because we want to make sure that she stays in school and she graduates. My nephew, my brother's other son, he just graduated. He's teaching high school. He's a photographer. So they're doing well. They're doing well.
Just to mention that everyone chipping in to help your niece stay in school is like a cooperative thing too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm rooted in. It's what I'm steeped in. It's what I know. So absolutely.
And I truly have an appreciation for this because that's how one of my internships abroad was funded by a cooperative of people putting together small amounts and not like one of those big fundraising efforts you see online, just people coming together. And I think there is massive power in that. And I want to get into that with you about the work at ZAMI NOBLA and about the community work. But I also had one question noted down. In terms of your queer identity, were you open with your siblings while raising them?
So I did not actually. So once I started raising them, I really put that to the back burner. I was in Jackson. I didn't know any other lesbians in Jackson. I was dating men. And once I came to that realization, but I realized that I didn't know anybody. I had to focus on raising these kids. I figured I would just deal with that later. So I did. However, I would say maybe into the third or fourth year, I met someone and they did know that I was lesbian. They did not like her and they wanted to move away and they wanted to come back and stay with me when she had left. She was from New York and she was supposed to be graduating. And so I told them that no, if you leave, you can't come back. You're going to either stay here or you're going to leave. So they decided to stay. But yeah, I mean, once I came out, I was not closeted. I was open. Certainly you find yourself coming out every day because there's always someone who, and people certainly are on their own journey with you. They have to become acclimated to the fact that you're now in this relationship, you have this identity and this orientation, and what they've known all of their lives has shifted and changed. So I've been able to have grace with people around that. But at the same time, I've not allowed them to disrespect me or my relationships. And my family, pretty much because I've always been unapologetic about who I am and how I live, they've gotten with the program. I mean, I'm not estranged from anybody because I'm a lesbian. If I am, I don't know anything about it. Maybe I am, but I don't know anything about it.
You mentioned this thing about not allowing people to disrespect you because of your identity. How did you do that?
By being verbal and vocal and calling them on it when it happened. So for example, my grandmother, before she passed, she was very homophobic. And at the time, I also had cut all my hair off. And my grandmother did not like that. Because she's very religious, and we haven't even talked about Christianity. That's another story for another day. So my grandma and so she did not like the fact. So she would talk about, God did not make Adam and Steve. He made Adam and Eve, and the fact that God, Delilah and long hair, and your hair was your strength, and if you cut it off, you were not strong, and all of this nonsense. And so I would just interject that narrative and say that, I'm a lesbian. This is who I am. I'm happy. I was at my grandmother's house once, and she started this. So I just went in the bedroom and I packed up everything and told her I was going to a hotel. I was saying to myself, I'm so glad I have a credit card. So I told her, I am going to a hotel because I would not be disrespected. I would come and see you tomorrow, but I would not stay here during my visit any longer. And I didn't. I packed up my little suitcase and I went to the hotel. And when I would call my relatives and they would talk about, their loved ones, and I would also say, do you want to, I would just tell them about my relationships, just like they would tell me about theirs. I would tell them about my relationships, whether they wanted to hear it or not. I didn't want to hear about all of their, heteronormative, practices. And so that's what I did. Just like they normalized their life, I would normalize my life. When they would say things that were derogatory, I would correct them. When they would say lifestyle, I would say it's not a lifestyle, it's my life. A wig, a hairstyle that's not, I can't take my life on and off like I can change a hairstyle. You know what I mean? This is my life. And so this is what I would do. They would say, how's your friend? I said, do you mean my partner? She's fine. So it was about the language. It was about the behavior. It was about the trying to erase my life. You don't get to erase my life when I get to hear about yours ad nauseum. It doesn't work that way. It's a give and take.
And I mean, generally, at least from where I sit, we hear about queerness and Blackness having a very dramatic intersection, or a very disturbing, I can't find the word. Basically, they don't get along, is what I have heard. What has your experience been with that?
That's a narrative that we need to disrupt. You hear all the time that Black folk are more homophobic than white folk, but Black folks are more homophobic than Asian folk. Black folk are more homophobic than Native folk. I don't believe I don't believe that Black folk are more homophobic than any other folk. I believe that what has been at the core of that has been Christianity, and it has been religion. I also think that what has been at the core of that is something that we don't give a lot of breadth and depth to in terms of talking about it. I think it has been about survival. I think many of our folk felt like this was just one other thing that we're putting on that's going to kill us. And they're about us staying alive and about our survival. So I think that really is that in their fear for us, you're already Black, you're already from the South, you're already a woman, you're already poor, and now you're queer. You already got triple jeopardy, and now you got quadruple jeopardy. You know what I mean? I think they just saw that there would be one more way to discriminate against us. And they came from a whole life of oppression and discrimination, where people found anything to discriminate against you. And they just feel like this was piling on. They felt like that this was something that we chose to pile on to be discriminated against. That's the way that I look at that. But to say that they're any more homophobic than anybody else, I don't buy that. I really don't.
So we have reached Atlanta. What happened in Atlanta? Also, we have crossed the 1 hour mark, 1 hour 15 minutes mark. I just wanted, I'm fine with us continuing for the next 3-4 decades. If you do get tired or if you need a break, do let me know and we can figure out how to do this.
Okay, so remember I told you that you could not interview me and Angela together for our stories. Remember I told you that?
I see
And
now.
now
I
you
see that.
understand why, right? So you and I might have to do a two-parter, because I know that there's a lot. I know that there's other things that you want to get to. So why don't we talk for 30 more minutes and then see where we are? We just might have to reschedule and do a part.
Yes, we can do that. We can do a part
Yeah, because
two.
I have to go. I have to. Yeah. Okay. So when I got to Atlanta, I was desperately in search of a Black lesbian community. Now, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that I never had a community. You know, I came to this life through reading the gay community news, through reading books like Say Jesus and Come to Me by Anne Allen Shockley, by reading Audre Lorde. You know, my life was constructed, my queer life was my Black lesbian life was constructed through books and magazines and women's music, but nothing that was tangible for me other than that one relationship that I had. It was short-lived because she graduated, but I didn't have a community. I didn't really have a context for my feelings and my emotions. I didn't have the lived experience, if you will. And I desperately wanted that. The gay community news was out of New York City, and it would come it was a weekly rag, and it would have like 50 staples. And I would just be so excited. And I would take it to my bedroom, and I remember just painstakingly taking out these staples one by one, because we're talking about the 80s, where it's criminal to be queer. You could get put in jail, you could be killed, and so these things were stapled. I mean, a million staples, right? And so that's where I really was able to get my culture from gay community news. There was a women's music magazine called Hot Wire with all the women musicians in there, and I would read about that. There was Lesbian Connection. These things literally saved my life. When I was in Mississippi, I would drive around and I would have this bump. I would have a loneliness to the bone. I can't, even in the midst of people, I was lonely. And it was a loneliness that I really felt. I can't describe it. My first lesbian relationship, I thought, oh my God, I really understood. And I know this sounds weird, and I've been told it sounds weird, but it's true for me. Once I had my first relationship, it allowed me to understand heterosexuality. I didn't understand it before then. I didn't understand why my girlfriends would be, my platonic girlfriends would be, just so excited about these men. And even though I was never excited about a man, I didn't understand it. And they would just be goo goo and gaga, and I would be like, but why? Once I had my first relationship, and once I loved a woman, then I understood how they could love a man. Does that make sense? Because
it is
before I
weird,
never,
but it makes sense. Yeah.
right. And so coming to Atlanta, prior to coming to Atlanta, I was able to get involved in my job as legal services. This was the time when men were being diagnosed with HIV and dying of AIDS. And so I was representing Black gay men in my job as a paralegal who were trying to get their Social Security benefits. And I became involved with a white gay man named Eddie Sandiford, who lived in Jackson, and who started a house for these men, because nobody wanted to touch them. They were just considered, this was a time when there was so much information. People didn't want to drink after you. They didn't want to shake your hand. They didn't want to hug you. They didn't want to do any of this. And so Eddie was this white gay man. He was an older man, he was an elder, and I got involved and started doing some volunteer work with his organization. And he took me to my first conference, my first LGBTQ conference in Birmingham, Alabama. And there was a bookstore there called Lodestar, where they had all of these gay books and newsletters and magazines. And I was like, oh my God, and buttons. I never seen anything like that. This was in Birmingham, Alabama, in Lodestar. And so when I moved to Atlanta, they told me about Kara's bookstore, the Feminist Bookstore. And that was the first place I went when I moved here. And I go into this bookstore in Little Five Points. And the first book I see is a pink cover. And the title says Living as a Lesbian. I was like, oh my God, I never seen anything like that. And it was Cheryl Clark, who was a Black lesbian poet who I know now. We interviewed her for the ZAMI NOBLA podcast. So coming to Atlanta for me liberated me on so many levels. While I had never been closeted, I was now able to live my life out fully, to explore my sexuality, to convene with women who looked like I did and believed some of the same things and loved the way I did. And at the same time, I was also wanting to continue my activism, because that's who I was and who I am. So I'd heard about ZAMI, and I was trying to find these women, but it was very difficult because these women were not the organization was not stable. It would meet, then it wouldn't meet, it would be in, it would be out, because, folks were afraid. They were closeted. They were trying to work, and they didn't want to lose their jobs, and they didn't want their families to kick them out of the house. And so it was a very difficult time in terms of trying to have any kind of cohesive community. I was able to meet these women through this white lesbian. She knew these women, these Black lesbians. She was a journalist, Garrett Findlay. So Garrett convened a Sunday brunch. She invited me. She was the only white lesbian in the room. It was her house. And that's how I met the women of ZAMI. And then I got involved with them a little bit, but they were not political enough for me. So I was working on the newsletter, and then I got more involved and sort of became the leader of the organization. And we were able to make a pact with the women who didn't feel safe enough to be out and to do this work in a very visible way, that those of us who were visible, who felt safe, we would be in the leadership, in the front lines, being visible, doing this work, and they would be invisible behind us, supporting us. And that's what we did. And it worked really well for a number of years, but we were able to actually stay viable. We were actually able to grow and to become a lifeline for a lot of folk coming to town, looking for community, for folk who were here needing community. And were able to really develop quite a few programs. I was working full-time in academia, in research, and I was doing this organizing and activism evenings and weekends. And at one point we had 4 groups running. We had a group for a coming out group, because we had a lot of women still coming out in their 50s and 60s and 70s. And this was a place where they could come and get support and resources. We had a group for women and children, because we had a lot of women who had been married or who had children. We also had a group for older adults. And then we had 4 groups. We had the coming out group, we had the group for women and children, and we had an intergenerational group. We also was able to get some funding, and we had a group called Just Us, but we with the women who were at the universities, they didn't feel safe. And so we rented a space in town, and twice a month on the weekends, we would get a van and go out to the university and drive them in, and they could meet each other and they could talk about issues. And we were able to hire a facilitator to do this. That was our way of pouring into the younger generation and giving back. We also had we had a program called Building Bridges, because we realized that the Black lesbians and lesbians of color in Atlanta didn't know each other. And so we got this funding, and we would meet once a month. And Building Bridges was simply to hire lesbian chefs to make the best meal. And so, for example, if we were talking about India, we would have Indian food if we were talking about Nigeria, we have a Nigerian food. And this is a way for us to learn about each other's culture and each other's food. And we really built bridges and bonds with each other. And many of us are still in touch with each other to this day, but we did that for a year, every month. It was a different thing. It was a different country. And that particular lesbian who was from that country, she had the platform. You know, she would open the program, she would talk about her culture, she would talk about what she needed from us, and then we would ask questions, and we would have an engaging conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, again, sounds like an interesting format for me to borrow.
Yes. It was really good. And then I started the Audre Lorde Scholarship Fund. In 1993. There was a student at Spelman College who was an activist in the community. She was an artist, and she had these big canvases she would carry around her back, and she didn't have a car. And we would have these community meetings, and after the meeting, she would get on the bus, and we were 9-to-5ers, we were professional, we had made it. And I thought something is wrong with this picture. And she needed her transcript, and she didn't have the money to get it. And so I never had a new car. I decided finally I'm going to buy a new car. So I called my friends, and I called 10 of my friends, and I said, let's fix up. I need everybody to give me $100 so I can fix this car up and give it to Wendy. We need all new tires. We need an oil change. We need a tune up. We need a wax job. We need everything. Everybody said yes. I gave her the car. You would have thought I had given her $1 million. She couldn't believe. I said, listen, the car is old. I want you to have this car, but the car is old. You can't go everywhere. You can't give somebody something and then tell them what to do with it. So she didn't really know how to drive. So we taught her how to drive. My friend and I would go out doing the evenings, and then she got her license. And I would call her and say, what are you doing? She said, oh, I'm picking up my friend from here. And I was like, okay. I don't know if this car can do all of that, but okay. And then she needed her transcript, and she couldn't get it. So I said to my friends, I'm going to start a scholarship fund for Black lesbians. And they laughed at me, literally laughed at me. And they said, you must be out of your mind. Who do you think is going to give money to Black lesbians to go to school? That's not going to happen. Ha ha. Forget about it. Sit down, Marianne. It's not going to happen. I said, maybe it won't. We have not. What's my thing? Because we wish not. So and you have to remember where I came from. This is where I come from. You know what I mean? If something does not exist, you create it. If something does not exist, you work it into fruition. If something does not exist, you get people around you to make it happen. You don't just say no and just walk away. That's just not how I'm made. So I said, nah, okay, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So they said, yeah, okay, fine, whatever, Marianne, it's not going to happen. It's not happening. I said, okay. So I set out initially to raise $3,000. The Black LGBTQ folk who were professionals. Oh, the criteria was that you had to be out and doing work in the community, because I wanted to support those students who were estranged from their families, who were community activists, who were trying to get their education, who were having a hard time because they had no money, they had no parental support, they had no family support. Those were the students that I wanted to support. But and so in order to get a scholarship from us, you had to be out and you had to be working in the community. And so they didn't like that. They didn't think that I should require that the students be out. So my response was, but the students who are closeted, they're getting support. They're passing. They don't need this support. So they wouldn't support it financially. They said, we're not going to support this. I said, okay. So initially, the white lesbians in Atlanta supported this scholarship fund. And it took me like a year to raise, it took me like 2 years to raise $1,000. I can't remember now, but it took me a long time just to raise the first scholarship, right? And then I had to get a fiscal sponsor, because when you have a scholarship fund, the Internal Revenue Service is very stringent. So I had to get a fiscal sponsor and all of that. They had to go through the lawyers and da, da, da. And one day I went to the post office and there was a check for $1,000. And I was like, wow, because I had never gotten a check for $1,000 before. You know, I'd gotten a $25, a $10, $5. I was like, wow, I'll never forget. I was sitting in my car and the check was from this Black lesbian. And I knew who she was. And I knew she was closeted. And I knew she was an attorney. And so I called her from my car and I said, Cheryl, you just given us a check for $1,000. Can I name the scholarship after you? I knew she was closeted. And I could hear her, even though we were not, I could just, and she, you know, there was like this silence. And then she said, yes. That idea that I had sitting in that parking lot to name the scholarship after Cheryl was really a boon for the scholarship fund. Because after that, once I started naming scholarships after people, no problem raising the money. Because who doesn't want a scholarship named after them? So I named the scholarships after them and they funded their scholarship. Now, in order to get a scholarship from us, you had to come to it. So this scholarship initially was for Black lesbians in Atlanta. So the first 3 scholarships, the first 2 scholarships went to a student at Georgia State University whose mother had just kicked her out, and Wendy, who was at Spelman. We had a reception to award these scholarships to them. Everybody in the community came. A kid's mother came to look at us, even though she had kicked her out, because she didn't believe that we did not want to sleep with her daughter. She thought we were pedophiles. She couldn't believe that we were just giving her daughter $1,000 with no strings attached. She didn't believe that. So she wanted to come and meet us. And so she did. And so after that, then it went statewide. And then we opened the scholarship up to Black gay men. And then we opened the scholarship up to LGBTQ scholars of color. And then it became a national scholarship. So we went from 2 scholarships to giving away 18 a year. 18, I mean, it went from $0 when we stopped doing that in 2008. We're giving over $250,000 in scholarships.
Wow.
And you would have to come to Atlanta to the weekend reception. If you didn't want to come, And we paid for it. It was all expense paid trip to Atlanta. If you couldn't come, you didn't get a scholarship from us. The reason why that was important was because we wanted you to be able to connect with community. A lot of these scholars were doing work in isolation in their rural communities. Maybe they started the LGBTQ student center, or maybe they started the Gay and Straight Alliance, or maybe they were, and so we wanted to support them. And we also wanted to have a form of mentoring in the scholarship fund for them. And so they would come. We had a member of ZAMI NOBLA who was actually over the HR for flight attendants at Delta. So she was over like 300,000 employees. She gave us the round trip tickets every year to fly these students in. So we're flying 18 students in from the West Coast, from East Coast, everywhere. We couldn't afford that. Can you imagine 18 round trip tickets from all over the country? So she would give us the round trip tickets every year. And then we would put them up at a nice hotel, because that weekend we wanted them to feel like the most important students on the face of the earth. We would bring them in on Friday. We would pick them up at the airport. We would chauffeur them to the hotel. Friday night, we would have a catered dinner catered by two lesbian chefs. The food would be amazing. And then on Saturday, we would take them around to the King Center. We would show them Atlanta. And then Saturday night, we would have a program. And at that program, it was like the Grammys. Everybody had their own entertainment. So one person had a dancer, this person had somebody singing a song for them. I mean, it was, so we would have 18 entertainers and 18 scholars, and we would call their names out. This person would sing for them, and they would just be like, oh my God. I mean, and then everybody would come. This was the one time, because you had the best talent, so everybody wanted to come. So this was the one time in Atlanta where the entire community, queer community, came together. Black, white, Asian, everybody would come to this because it was free. It was free. They would see these scholars. They would hear this entertainment. It was a great, and we did this year after year after year. It was amazing. It was an amazing time. It really was.
And this is still before the founding of NOBLA.
Yes.
The national organization.
Yes. So this was ZAMI, Atlanta's premier organization for lesbians of African descent. So that's who we were. And then 2008, I decided that I was going to leave ZAMI, turn it over to somebody else, because I just was tired. I needed a break. And then in 2011, I looked around and I noticed that a lot of older Black lesbians were disappearing from the landscape. I didn't see them around town. I didn't see them in community spaces. I just simply did not see them. And I realized that we were all aging in place. We've been with each other for 20 years. And at this point, we're like 50, 60, 70. It's like, where's everybody? And as a social worker, and as someone who had worked in public health, even though I have a master's in social work, I've never had a job officially as a social worker. I've always worked in public health. And I understood the dangers of isolation. I understood the dangers of not having intergenerational connection. And so I wanted to start a new organization. And there's I reached out to this Black woman who was a lesbian, who was in her 80s, who was living in this community in Arizona with these white lesbians, pretty much. And she was with Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. That's the organization, OLOC, Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. And I said, what do you think about, I want to start this organization. And she was very encouraging. And so that's how ZAMI NOBLA got started. It was started as a way to center Black lesbian elders and to provide spaces for community. The LGBTQIA community writ large, as you know, is very youth-centered. And a lot of people, once they age, are not welcomed in certain spaces. They go to the club that they used to frequent for years. They feel like people are like, why are you here? You know, you're 40, get out. They may not say that, but that's the vibe that people get. It's just a very ageist community, and there's just not a lot of education and awareness for LGBTQ elders. And so I wanted to help provide some solutions for that.
How did so I know that the organization is called ZAMI NOBLA. So was it built in alliance with the original organization that you left in 2008?
That's a great question. So, you know, nobody had picked up ZAMI by 2011. And I was talking to a younger Black queer woman. She and I are in a co-mentoring relationship. And I wanted to really name it something new altogether. And she encouraged me. She said, nah, everybody knows ZAMI. You know, you're well known. You got a great relationship. You should just keep that and add on to the name. Because I said, I want to do something around aging. She was like, no, you. So I said, okay. So I listened to her. It was Paris Hatcher. So I listened to Paris. And that's why it's called ZAMI NOBLA. And the NOBLA, you know, stands for the National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging. But I really liked it. It's a lot, it's a mouthful. And a lot of people don't want to spit out that mouthful. You know, they just want to say ZAMI, and I say no, it's ZAMI NOBLA. Because and when we write it, I like to write the whole thing out, because I think it's important. It's important for representation. It's important for visibility. It's important for people to be able to find us. And it's important also, most especially, for people to know that we are here. You know, a lot of young people think that they're shocked to know that there's a queer elder who's 70 and 80 and 90 years old. They can't wrap their minds around that. Because in their minds, the immediacy is that I'm not going to live out of this teenage gay angst. I'm not going to be here. You know, gay people don't live long. You know, we don't live good quality, thriving, productive lives. It's important for the representation. They need to see us. They need to see that. They need to know that. They need to feel that. They need to believe that. They need to be rooted in that. And so that's important to me. That's my contribution.
I think that's very vital and important to me as well, in the sense that you need to be able to see a future if you're going to want to live it.
Yes, totally.
I again want to draw attention to the time. Do you think this is where you want to pause for now and we come back to the rest of it at a later date?
Sure, we could do that.
I could keep going on and on, but yes,
no,
the day
I
must
don't even
go
have
on.
the time. So thank you for being mindful, because I don't even know what time it is. So
I paid attention to another half an hour, so we stopped right after half an hour. So I will email you to figure out how we continue this and do the conversation with Angela and you. I should probably pause. I could possibly listen to Marianne forever, but she had work to get to and it's already gone past midnight at my end. But I promise we will figure out a way to take this ahead and record as many parts as needed to get a full account of Marianne Adams. So stay tuned to Queer Lives. So after a bit of schedule wrangling, Marianne and me have been able to carve out some time to wrap up our conversation. Here is the concluding part of Queer Lives episode 4. So let's jump in. Recording in progress, the woman has spoken. And hi, Marianne, thank you so much for taking some time and coming back to wrap up this interview. So yeah, where we left off things the last time, which was quite a few weeks back, but it seems like yesterday, we were talking.
When you call, I come. What can I say?
That is the sweetest thing. It's incredible to have this connection with you, and kind of, I don't know if maybe the pandemic, this is what it made happen. Is ZAMI's otter.ai a thing?
It's a thing, it takes notes, but you can kick it out. You can absolutely put it out of the chat. So please feel free to do that.
Okay, I have no idea how to do that. Okay,
you
yes,
can just remove. Yeah, perfect. See, you did it.
Okay. So where we left off the last time, we were just getting into ZAMI NOBLA's work, and you had given me some context on of the scholarships and how and what was the reasoning behind setting up ZAMI NOBLA and naming it like that. So I think what I really do, because for me, community models and how we make them work is really important. So if you could start off by telling us a little bit more, us, I say us like in the royal sense, telling us about the work that ZAMI NOBLA does, how it builds community, and what does that look like?
Thank you for the question. And certainly talking about ZAMI NOBLA is one of my favorite things to do. So I'm always happy to have an opportunity to spread the word, particularly because LGBTQ elders are so invisible in this world. And certainly with our community being so youth-oriented, we're often left out, and ageism impacts us severely. And so with ZAMI NOBLA, we're trying every day to increase the depth and breadth of our work to try to reach as many lesbian elders as possible, particularly those who are so socially isolated, who are estranged from friends and family, and essentially don't have a lot of community. And so that's reflected in the programs that we offer. One of the things that I think is a misnomer, is certainly not factual, is the fact that the LGBT community writ large is a wealthy community. What people tend to see in the media are white gay men who are living an extravagant, luxurious lifestyle. When, and by that I mean, they see the trips and the travel and all of that. And conversely, many of our lives are not lived that way. Many of us are not even working class. Many Black lesbians are poor. And so we have something called the Black Lesbian Elder Fund that we try to replenish as often as we can financially, so that we can offer funding for rent, for utilities, for transportation, for medical co-pays, for nutritious food. At the moment, it's replenished because there's such a need. We also are an organization that is at the intersection of race, class, gender, age, and sexual orientation. And so as Black women, we're often taught to put ourselves last. And even while we try to center ourselves, it's very difficult for many of us to accept the fact that we need help, that we need assistance, because we're very resilient. And so we're able to hold the resilience and the joy and the struggle at the same time. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to imagine, but we've been doing that all of our lives. We've been doing that as long as we've been in these yet to be United States, with the ever-present oppression, white supremacy, and oftentimes it's very difficult. So we do a lot because we have a lot of skill sets, but we don't have much capacity in terms of staff or funding. And right now, what we have going on, as I mentioned, we have the Elder Fund. As you know, right now we're doing the COVID-19 and lesbian research, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on older lesbians. We're also teaching out ukulele classes because, again, we need some joy in the midst of this increasingly difficult time of COVID and just life in general. We also have a book club, and we also have support that we're offering generally just with life's issues. We have recently one of our members who's 63 years old. She's legally blind. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she reached out because she does not know how to leverage resources. She does not know where to go. She's living independently in her own apartment, and she does not want to leave it. She's barely making the rent. She doesn't really have anything left over, so she applied for a job at Amazon, and had been waiting for that. And she's trying to decide, do I have the surgery or do I take the job? I need the money from the job in order to help me support myself during and after the surgery. And so as you can imagine, Hannah, that's a very difficult place to be in. She finally decided to take the job and put off the surgery. Once she decided to take the job is located at an area that where public transportation does not go. So now she has to figure out, how am I going to get out to the job? So we're trying to help her, leverage those resources and all the different issues that come at us from our members who are just quite frankly just struggling. As you know, we finished renovating the Biggers house. And starting on May 16th, we're going to have our huge volunteer planting day, because we're going to be planting our 5 community gardens. So we can have some toxic-free, nutritious, healthy food to eat. So we're really excited about that. And we are currently planning and preparing for that. So, we're also working with an organization who is looking at caregiving and dementia. And we have quite a few members who are caring for their partners and their family members who are dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, and other kinds of diseases. So, we just got a lot going on. What can I say? We do what we do. We try the best we can. We just keep it moving.
And the stereotype, of course, of older people is that they have so much time. They have nothing to do.
Exactly. That is definitely the misconception.
Also, throwing back to the last time we spoke, you mentioned, since you mentioned this lady who was dealing with breast cancer, you also mentioned that you've had a tryst with cancer. I don't know how to phrase this. Never mind. But could we talk a little bit about that? Because I put that down, but I didn't put it in the email. But could we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a 16-year breast cancer survivor. And I have, from the very beginning, made a decision to live my diagnosis and my treatment and my survivalship out loud. And the reason I've done that is because I think it's really important for women to be able to find me if they need support. For me to be able to share the resources that I've garnered and that I've learned about along my journey. And because there's so much silence or shame around the breast cancer in our communities and around the diagnosis, a lot of people feeling like it's their fault, that they've done something wrong, that they brought this upon themselves. And particularly folks who are religious, many of them believe that. And there's really not a lot of support. There are not support groups for partners who are care partners. There is not a lot of support. There are a lot of heterosexual support groups, but not many that really make space and room for us and our unique issues as lesbians dealing with breast cancer. Some women are having issues around body image and what that looks like and how they can continue to be sexually intimate with their partners. So there are a lot of issues around that. But for me, I've been able to clearly survive. I mean, it's been 16 years. I was diagnosed with something called DCIS, that's ductal carcinoma in situ. It's a very it was diagnosed very early stage. It was in my left breast. I opted to have a bilateral mastectomy because I am not one of those people who want to be worried about, is it going to come back in the right breast and looking over my shoulder. That's not who I am. I didn't want to do that. So I opted to have, I could have had a lumpectomy, but I opted to have the bilateral mastectomy. And I opted not to have reconstruction surgery. I had really good insurance, but I didn't want to go through that surgery, that hospitalization. So I like to call myself a no-breasted Amazon. That's who I am. So I'm very comfortable having no breasts. I walk in the world that way, and it's who I am.
It's and again, this idea of support groups where there's one aspect where you are bringing an expert and they are an expert on the subject, and hence they can help you with things. And but this idea of being an expert of survival, not in the sense that there is a qualification attached to it, but that someone who's figured their way through life, helping others figure their way through life. And I think that's really important to understand as a community, because a lot of communities, especially in India, where expertise is considered a big thing, right? Degrees are considered a big thing. Just have understanding that your life experience is the expertise. I think that's very important, and thank you for sharing that. Is cancer specifically something that ZAMI NOBLA looks into, or is that more of a personal thing for you?
No, well, if you look at the statistics in this country, particularly, women who bear the brunt of the diagnosis of breast cancer are Black women. Okay. And even more so Black lesbians. And many of us have not had children, and many of us have a genetic disposition toward breast cancer. And so breast cancer, we have some original data that ZAMI NOBLA has collected in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University on sexual minority women and breast cancer. We have about 4 or 5 articles published, and they can be found on our website at www.zaminobla.org. And so we've also provided support groups. As I mentioned, we have ongoing support. And so breast cancer and providing support is very central to the work that we do because the need is so great. You mentioned earlier about the lived experience and how vital and important that is. And what you're talking about essentially is peer navigation. One of the programs that we are trying to find funding for is to develop a group of women who are trained as peer navigators who can leverage resources. And these would be Black lesbians over the age of 50, because in terms of providing a structure for them to do this work, we would also be supplementing their income. And it would be a win-win for us. You would have women that look like you, that have had that experience, that you can develop some trust with. And also at the same time, because so many of us are struggling financially, we can help supplement their income. And so that's the program that we're working on right now, and that we hope to bring to fruition, certainly sometime within the latter part of this year.
That sounds like an excellent program. Where do I sign up?
We would love for you to come here and sign up.
Which again brings me to an important point. I know that the focus is older women, older lesbians. Where does, community is more overarching though. So where do young people or younger people fit in? Because a lot of, and especially in queer spaces, a lot of us actually start feeling like we don't belong pretty much from our 30s. And a lot of us, because of the qualities of queer space, we don't feel like we belong there anyway. So how do young people, are there young people participating? How do they get involved?
So if you look at our mission, we've been very intentional about making sure that there's an emphasis on intergenerational organizing, intergenerational mobilization. And we know how vital that is to be in a generational space because we all need each other. There's no doubt about that. That's not even debatable. But we also know at the same time that the LGBTQ community here is very youth oriented. And so many of the resources here go toward the youth, and older elders are left out. I'm not saying they're left out intentionally, they're just not thought about. And there's a lot of ages and people don't want to really think about getting old, because when they think about getting old, they think about disease and death and dying, and people just can't wrap their minds around that. And so we're trying to change that paradigm. So that when you think about aging, you think about affirmation and empowerment and vitality, and you can't wait to get there. And, it doesn't have to be the disease and death and dying. But anyway, I digress. And so we have quite a huge footprint on social media, for example. So we have a book club, and our book club is open to any woman over the age of 18. Any queer woman, whether she identifies as bi, lesbian, trans woman, binary, our book club is open. You can participate equally, absolutely. We also have a group called the Purple Thumb for women who like to play in the dirt. And that group is open to any woman over the age of 18 living anywhere in the country. And this is a way that we're growing food together. We're learning, we're helping each other. We're showing out photographs, and I planted this, and what does this mean? And can you help me with this? We get together, we share stuff. Open to certainly, again, like I mentioned, anybody. We have our planting day at the Bigger's house, open to anybody. So most of our programming is open. Right now, we're part of a group called Metro Atlanta Lesbian and Trans Housing Alliance, and transforming, as a Black trans men and non-binary group of any age, and Trans Housing Atlanta of any age. And we also have these ad hoc partnerships, or where we do things. Right now, there's a group called Black Lesbian Archives, and they are a young Black lesbian group. Crew, who is the founder, is out of Chicago. Crew is not 30. I talked to Crew 2 weeks ago. We're about to do something with Crew. So yeah, I mean, we absolutely understand the importance, and we do make space, and we're very intentional about making that space.
Thank you. That sounds really cool. And I want to come back to the gardening and the Purple Thumb bit, because gardening is a joy of mine as well. And could you tell me a little bit about how the community gardening program was set up?
Sure, absolutely. Well, once we essentially acquired the Bigger's house, and while we were waiting for and figuring out how we were going to find the funding to renovate the house, we decided in the meantime that we would not allow the land to go to waste, because it's a huge backyard. And so at the time, I was teaching in the Graduate School of Social Work at Georgia State University, and we had community projects. And so I submitted an application, and some grad students applied to and really mapped out these community gardens. These were young graduate students. There were 5 of them from all over the country, and really mapped out, did fundraisers, raised the money, ordered the raised beds. We selected what we were going to plant, and that's really how the community, and planted 5 community gardens, and we recruited the volunteers. We had volunteers from every walk of life, every shade, every hue, every orientation, identity. I mean, people love to play in the dirt. So it was very easy. We had queer churches, we had mainstream organizations helping. We had probably about 50 volunteers. We had a Black gay man to pay a Black lesbian chef to provide the free lunch for us for that day. We ordered T-shirts, and everybody came and put on a T-shirt so we could take this huge photograph at the end. We had the firefighters of Atlanta who came out, who provided funding for the ramp, and they said we also want to be able to help with our physical brawn and not just the money, and they helped. I mean, it's just a beautiful community offering of people. Now, it's easy for us to get people to help us plant, but not so easy finding people to help us maintain the gardens. You know, people don't necessarily want to come and pull weeds and water and that kind of thing. So when it came to that, it was slim pickings, but we managed to get it done. And so I think it's important to say, Hannah, that once we grew the food, that in terms of the harvesting, it was open to any LGBTQ member in this community who wanted to come and who wanted to pick the vegetables. And it was also open to the people in the neighborhood where the house is located. It's a very working class Black community, and we wanted to make sure that we were a good neighbor and that we remain a good neighbor, and that we make sure that we make it known that we want people to be able to also, reap the benefits of this harvest.
Oh my God, that sounds so good. We actually tried doing some terrace gardening. A friend has a big terrace. We thought of launching a community gardening program there, but like everything, like you said, comes down to where will you find the people, and that's where a lot of the getting stuck happens. Because again, all we know is that we'll put it up on social media and hopefully people will show up. But yeah, so it's a little bit of a work in progress. And that consistency of doing it is perhaps where, and then eventually people show up.
Absolutely, because this would be our third year of doing it. And we had people to register so we could know, and we were asking them for their T-shirt sizes. We were going to be supplying free lunch. That was certainly a selling point, and the T-shirts. And we took really good photographs. And so you're right, we can show Angela made a beautiful flyer. And so they actually see people, playing in the dirt and doing that. And it's, it was really, I think, a selling point, a marketing point. And you're right, the more we do it, then the more it becomes an institution in the community, and people want to be a part of something that is successful.
I think that's very important to note.
And one thing I did, I was out there last week with the gardener, who's going to be overseeing everything, and I went Facebook Live. Okay, this is what it is. So, that's important to show people the progress. Hey, y'all, we're going to be out here on May 16th. For those of you who came out here, come again. And everybody's like, wow, Marianne, oh, you look, so you just generate that excitement. I found as an organizer, it's really important for people to have investment in the project from the beginning. This is not me, it's not us, it's not you and you, it's us. You are part of this community. This is you. You need to be invested in this, whether you pick a tomato or not. You have grown this tomato. And so, people want to feel a part of something. They want to feel like they belong to us something. And I think it's important. We all have that need, whether we know it or not, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. I think we all have a need to belong to something.
Yes, my brain is immediately rushing to, okay, now we need to rethink how we talk about the community gardening program. Right now it's just a talk between friends, but thank you for the ideas. So we usually wrap up with the two questions. One being, is there something that you want to talk about or share that I didn't know to ask about, or I forgot to ask, or it just didn't come up? Something that you personally want to talk about? Or any work of NOBLA that we didn't cover?
I can't remember what we talked about last time, but I'm sure we probably covered it. I just can't think of what we talked about. I just want people to be mindful of the elders in their lives, not to ignore them or to take them for granted or to be fearful of them, but to stop and, invite an elder for a conversation over Zoom. Be curious about who they are and who they've been and where they're going. And most importantly, the interconnectedness, because we're all connected to each other in some way. There's so much wealth and so much knowledge. And it's a bi-directional kind of relationship. We all learn constantly from each other. And just don't walk by an elder and not say hello. Acknowledge, look them in the eye and just say hello. Extend your hand and say hi. My name is, just an organic conversation. And I think folks will be surprised how rich the conversation is for both parties, not just one or the other. I don't know more because I'm older than you, not necessarily. You don't know, you're not hipper because you're younger than me, not necessarily. I can be old and hip and cool, You can be young and not hip and not cool. And so I just think that, just acknowledge each other.
Thank
so
you.
I think that's what I want. Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that. And then I have something else I want to say when we get to that point as a wrap up. If you want me to do it now, I'm happy to do it now.
Yeah, you can do it now because then, all I'm left is to ask for the prompt, and that's okay. We can close then.
Okay. My goal is to learn something new every day. No matter how large or how small. And I would certainly encourage your listeners to remain a lifelong learner, to stay open, intellectually curious, and emotionally present as much as we can in this world that's pulling on us every day in some way, shape, or form. I think that when the facts change, we need to change our minds. We don't need to stay so intellectually and emotionally rigid that we lose out on life. I think that's really important, to just be open to what life brings, and to continue to learn. And to be willing to offer the gifts and graces that we have. That's what I would leave with your listeners.
I'm going to come back to this before I go to the next thing. When you say your goal is to learn something new every day, is there a way you practice this, or is it something that you leave up to the universe to teach you something new?
I practice it by keeping my ears open and by listening. I was on a panel yesterday, and it was a brunch and learn panel with peace and security funders in this country. And there was a young Indian woman on, and she talked about taking a sabbatical. And she said when she was on her sabbatical, she decided to take social media off of her phone because she was engaging in self-care. And when she came back off of her sabbatical, she did not put social media back on her phone. That was something I learned. It was very invaluable for me, because I'm trying to practice self-care. I'm trying to maximize practice and minimize theory. And so for me, that was a practice that because I was listening to what she said, and because I'm trying to do better at self-care. And, stilling my mind. One way to do that was what she said. So I do it by intentionally reading stuff and seeking out information, but also keeping my eyes and ears open to what comes in them. Not closing my ears and closing my eyes.
I think that is very important, and I think a lot of us could could consider taking social media off their phones for a little while. Not that I mean, to each their own, but yes, I particularly find notifications of any sort, of any sort kind of very, very distracting to me. So I eliminate all things that can pop up notifications, but
Yes.
that's more of a neurodivergent thing than a self-care thing. But yes, so the final point for our conversation is, sorry, I got completely distracted because there is a notification that says there's remaining time and I'm like, why? So we usually ask every guest to give a prompt or a provocation to anyone who's listening, reading, or watching this. And that could be anything that helps them think, or a challenge that is thrown out to them, or a question that you can seek that they can answer. So do you have a prompt or a provocation for our listeners?
Well, what rarely came to my mind was a quote, part of a quote by my shero, Black lesbian feminist poet Audre Lorde. And one of the things that she said, Hannah, is that, as people on the margins, as Black people, as queer people, as people of color, as women, as poor people, as working people, we were never meant to survive. And so I would say, live out loud, take your place in this universe. Don't play small. When you're walking on the street, take the space. Don't walk on the very edge of the street. Walk in the middle of the street. Let people go around you. Take up space in this world that people don't believe we should have. We have a right to be here. We have a right to do our work, to love, to live. We have a right to be as healthy and as happy as we can. And don't forget therapy.
Don't forget therapy. Beautiful words to end on. Thank you so much, Marianne. This has been a blast on so many levels. And I'm going to have so much fun just reviewing our conversation and making notes and sharing them with people. It's been just such a joy. And I look forward to non-recorded conversations with you too.
Thank you so much for inviting me into your space, into this space that you made me feel very welcomed. I love the fact that we made this connection, this global connection, because again, we're sisters and we need to know each other. It's no coincidence, it's no accident that we've met. And not only have we met, but we're going to have a relationship that we will sustain over the years and over the miles and over the waves. And so I look forward to building this relationship, to continuing this relationship with you, and to actually coming one day to see you and to have you come and visit with us when COVID has gone someplace and buried her head. And so our space is open to you anytime you want to come. We'd love to actually have you here and to host you.
Thank you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. All right then. Bye.
Have a sweet week.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Marianne's genuine joy in connecting with people makes me so happy. It makes me feel seen, included, and safe. And I hope that it translates to anyone who is listening. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. And take a leaf from Marianne's book and live out loud and let us know how that goes for you. And if you liked what you experienced and would like to get more, check out my website, dragonsandrainbows.com. That's dragonsandrainbows.com. And finally, if you are or know queer people who'd like to talk about their queer lives with me, Hina Siddiqui, please do get in touch with me over social media or send me a message through my website. That's it from me, Hina, and hope to see you next time for more Queer Lives.